like and subscribe. Here's the video. I noticed something strange about Assassin's Creed Blackflag Resynced. The remake takes some liberties with the structure and format of the original Assassin's Creed 4, but that's not what I'm talking about here. There's something bigger going on, something significantly more substantial. They, moved all the buttons around. Like on the controller, the buttons do different things in the remake compared to the original game. The main character has the same abilities as he does in the original, but they decided to change everything anyway. The biggest change here, the thing I keep thinking about, is that the attack button has been moved from square to R1. Today, I want to just work something out that's been eating at me lately. When did R1 become the default attack button? Okay, of course I'm kidding. Ubisoft moving where the buttons are on the controller isn't some massive change, but Assassin's Creed Blackflag Resynced has really wedged itself into my mind with this whole controller shakeup thing. The game itself is pretty good, but I can't stop thinking about the decision to move the attack button from a face button to a bumper, because, well, as I play it, I keep instinctively hitting square to swing my sword, but instead of swinging it, I crouch, since that's what's mapped to that button now. I think part of the problem comes from the fact that I played Black Flag back in the day, so I have some deep storage muscle memory guiding my hand to the button from my time with it from more than a decade ago, but I'm not fully convinced that's the only reason why I keep doing that. I've actually already talked about this exact topic in a bonus video I made for Patreon and Nebula. Link to that will be pinned in the comments. But with how much I've thought about it ever since making that video, my feelings have evolved, and I really felt the need to talk about it more at length. The square button, or the X button, depending on what kind of controller you're holding, was the default attack button for third-person, melee-focused action games for the majority of the 3D era of gaming. Of course, that's not true in totality, but if you look back to the biggest action games of the PS2 and the PS3 era, like the Batman Arkham games, the God of War series, and, of course, Assassin's Creed, you'll notice a very obvious pattern for where the attack command is mapped. Even in third-person shooters like Uncharted or The Last of Us, melee attacks are commonly mapped to the square button. There's been a shift in recent years, however. Now, it's not uncommon for action games to map the attack button to R1. These days, it feels like if you're swinging a sword in a video game, there's a pretty good chance that it'll be mapped to a shoulder button. This shift, I think, is pretty easy to understand thanks to the popularity and influence of From Software's design choices. Welcome to the video essay. We're talking about Dark Souls. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that From Software is the most influential developer of the last decade or so. So many mainstream game design elements have their roots in games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. But the easiest thing to notice that From Software popularized with its influence was the mapping of the attack button to R1. Initially, this button placement was seen as incredibly jarring. Since players had been so conditioned to dishing out attacks with the square button, changing the placement of such a crucial command to an often overlooked button on the controller made it so that, to play Demon Souls and Dark Souls well, you had to do some rewiring of your brain and work on a new skill. I remember the first time I ever played a From Software game. I was a sophomore in college and my roommate was playing Dark Souls 3 since it had just come out. I was struggling with the attack button placement since it was new to me, so he rebound the basic light attack to X. While I was having a hard time with attack being mapped to the shoulder button, this new placement didn't work at all, because Dark Souls 3 was designed around the idea that the player would have both thumbs on the sticks and their finger on the attack button at all times, and the moments when that isn't the case, like having to dodge or heal, are incredibly quick. This setup should make us ask some questions about the design of the game that it's in. The design, then, of Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. Same with Dark Souls. 3 actions are prioritized above all else based on their proximity to touch on the controller. Move, look, attack. But does the design of the Black Flag remake prioritize those 3 actions in the same way? I would argue that it does not. This button layout does a lot to emphasize combat and gives the player the most amount of options when choosing how to engage with combat. Because of how punishing the level design is in Dark Souls, being able to move, change the direction of the camera, and attack at the same time is crucial for overcoming its obstacles. It's a button layout created for intentional movement and fast-paced decision-making, since there are monsters waiting for you around every corner. Assassin's Creed Black Flag, on the other hand, isn't really about combat. Now, when I say that, I know it might raise some eyebrows since, look at this. What do you mean it's not about combat? But when we talk about what a game is actually about on a fundamental level, I think it's important to weigh the depth of its systems. In Assassin's Creed Black Flag, you get nearly your entire combat loadout in the first hour of the game. There is very little evolution that happens over the course of its length. Sure, there's some enemy variety that gets introduced as the game goes on, and you end up with a handful of new abilities, but the principles of combat are learned and mastered at nearly the same time. Parry these attacks, dodge these ones, kill guys once their guard is broken, rinse and repeat literally hundreds of times per hour. I don't think this is bad, for the record. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is a power fantasy about being a skilled pirate. With how easy it is to kill enemies, you kind of get the feeling that Edward Kenway is leagues above the other basic British and Spanish soldiers he's fighting. The combat is not really an issue for him. It's not some big challenge he has to overcome, and it's also only a single element of what you're doing when playing the game. By a rough estimation, I'd say that you're only in combat for about 1/6 of the time when playing Black Flag. You spend the rest of your time exploring the jungle, stealthing around enemy encampments, and finding new shanties for your crew to sing while sailing the high seas. During most of those sequences, you aren't attacking anything at all, and when you are in combat, you very rarely need full control of the camera with the way that it pulls back during combat sequences to account for the dozens of enemies present in a single encounter. In my previous bonus video about the topic, I said that the game's design supports this new control scheme, but after putting a lot more time into the game, I've decided that I don't think that's actually the case. In Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, you're never in a place that requires a constant hand on the camera, never in a situation that asks you to think carefully about where you're looking while also requiring you to be ready to attack at a moment's notice. It's a control scheme made for thinking quickly on your feet when you are at a disadvantage, but in Black Flag, you are the one with all of the power. By the virtue of its design, have mastery over your enemies with your combat skills and the wide camera angles. So, it sometimes feels like you've been given the wrong set of tools for the job. Why do this, then? Why change the control scheme from the original game? Why are we so beholden to right bumper as the attack button now? I think the simple answer is because, like all parts of culture, there are trends that get popular and then die out, or maybe just change over time. When you picture an action game from the PS2 and PS3 era, you imagine the mechanics and controls of the God of War clones of the day, like Dante's Inferno or Castlevania Lords of Shadow. This type of system was a very popular design trend that dictated how so many of those games controlled, but as new trends take hold of culture, it all starts to shift. When we try to do the same for the PS4 and PS5 era, the types of action games at the front of culture that are not developed by From Software usually still take some form of the studio's design ideas as inspiration. Of course, there's the overwhelming number of Souls-likes that release each year that use the right shoulder button as the basic attack command, like Lies of P or Steel Rising or any of From Software's games, but many of those systems have crept into games outside of the genre. God of War, for example, now uses the right shoulder button as its attack command, a shift from the button layout its previous entries used. Even horror games like Silent Hill F have taken cues from Software by mapping the attack command to the right shoulder button. To bring it back to Assassin's Creed, the series had a big shakeup with its formula in 2017 when Assassin's Creed Origins was released, which, among many things, changed the attack button from square to R1, where it's stayed ever since. So it's easy to understand, then, why the remake of Black Flag decided to change the location of the attack button. It's a game design trend that's incredibly popular thanks to the success of games like Elden Ring and the Assassin's Creed series at large. But why then, in this game specifically, does it still not feel right? I think the economy of buttons on a controller is fascinating. The decision a developer makes when they choose what commands go where should come in tandem with design choices made for the game. But with Assassin's Creed Blackflag Resynced, it feels a lot less intentional and more like formula. The previous Assassin's Creed games for the last few years have been like this, so this game will be like this. That adherence to the formula, however, gets in the way of the feel of the game. Come with me on this for a second, okay? In Assassin's Creed Blackflag, you have a few different ways of killing people, but the two most common are slicing them up with your sword or stabbing them with your hidden blade. The sword, as we've discussed, is mapped to R1 on PS5, but assassinations are mapped to the triangle button. In the original game, both assassinations and sword attacks were mapped to square, which, to me, causes a certain kind of mental link between the two actions. In a game with as many systems to keep track of and abilities to manage as Assassin's Creed, it's always important to establish a clear connection between button presses and the actions they're associated with, so that there aren't any crossed mental wires. In the original game, you understand that reaching your thumb for the square button means that an enemy is going to get hurt. Whether you're in stealth or active combat, you know the exact place your thumb needs to go to take care of deadly situations. In the remake, however, that link is a little less strong because the crouch button has been slotted into the original attack command's place. Assassinations aren't the only attack command mapped to a face button either. Anytime you want to do a special move like a guard break or this big Spartan kick, you need to hold down R2 and then hit the face button that corresponds with the attack you want to do. I thought I was going a little crazy when having this problem in Blackflag Resynced, but when revisiting Assassin's Creed Shadows, I found something that helped me make sense of it. In Shadows, the crouch button is also mapped to the square button like in Blackflag. However, the assassination button is mapped to R1. In playing that game, I never encountered the issue of crossed mental wires, and I think the button layout is the crucial piece in all of it. This isn't some inherent gaming crime. Plenty of games spread their violence commands across the entirety of the controller. But when looking specifically at Assassin's Creed's systems and button layout, I find there to be some dissonance. There's a confusion that happens as a result of turning a square attack button game into an R1 attack button game while keeping most of the attack commands bound to the face buttons. So let me answer a question for you. Why not just rebind the attack button to square? After all, you can easily do that in the settings. Well, I did. And I hated it. For some reason, forcing Assassin's Creed Blackflag to play by my rules felt wrong too. Assassin's Creed was a square attack button series for 8 years, from 2007 with the original game to 2015 with Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which means that it's actually been an R1 attack button series for even longer, 9 years from 2017 with Assassin's Creed Origins to now. It's kind of weird to think about, but it's been doing the press R1 to attack for longer than it hasn't. To be fair, it's done it in fewer games given how long it takes for Ubisoft to develop them, but still longer time-wise. I talked about the strange feeling of switching the controls in my previous video. Take a look. The control scheme feels a little bit like trying to ride a bike in the suburbs. I do not belong on the sidewalk. There is something fundamentally strange about trying to ride there, past all the people who want me in the street. But if I ride in the street, I'm in the way of cars who want me riding on the sidewalk. So if the design of the game seems to support a playstyle that lends itself to mapping attack to the square button, what's happening here? Why do I feel like something is still wrong? Well, I played more of the game with square as the attack button after I had initially written about it, and realized that the strange disconnect didn't have much to do with the game, and had more to do with me and the way that modern games have conditioned players into expecting certain things. It took me a while to understand what my problem was, but I think it all comes down to the fact that so many games want to cater to comfort above all else, and being able to control the camera at all times is comfortable, and now largely expected. One of the things I find most fascinating about revisiting older games is the way that they handle their cameras. When people talk about older games feeling dated, I feel like camera controls are one of the main things that gets brought up in those conversations. You look at games with fixed camera angles like Silent Hill 2 and the original Resident Evil, and people talk about how they feel bad to play. It's disorienting, it's argued, to not be in control of where I'm looking. It feels so dated and wrong. And then, when these games get remade to give the player full control over the camera, it becomes the definitive way to experience a classic title. To me, it's clear that in gaming culture at large, Players want authority over the camera above all else. It does not matter if the lack of camera controls in an older title was an artistic choice. In the minds of many modern gaming fans, if a game does not offer them a camera that they have full control over, it feels bad. So, what better way to give the player that immediate sense of comfort than letting them hold onto the camera controls as much as possible, regardless of if that decision truly makes sense for the game? In playing Blackflag Resynced with remapped controls, the reason I think I was having a hard time adjusting was because I had to forfeit some of that initially granted comfort. With all of that in mind, the idea that the control scheme was decided to fit the current form of inputs that players have grown used to thanks to the prevalence of the shoulder button as the attack command, it feels like Assassin's Creed Blackflag Resynced has an identity problem. It controls like every other game on the market. When you pick up a controller, the tutorial is just a formality. You already know that you'll be clicking the left stick in to sprint, that you'll be parrying incoming attacks with L1, that you will be striking down enemies with R1. It feels like the game eschews the responsibility of making a deliberate choice with its control design. This isn't a problem with the Assassin's Creed series alone. It is a much wider part of gaming culture that places absolute value in the comfort of the familiar for the player over the cohesion of design. Of course, in mapping the attack button in Blackflag to the square button, that would also be a return to the familiar for fans of the original game. But it would be breaking the conventions that the series has leaned on for nearly 10 years to emphasize the true strength of the original and now the remake's design. Studios sand off rough edges that evoke emotion through design in favor of control. I'm not saying that the remapping of the attack button in Assassin's Creed Blackflag is some gaming tragedy that completely ruins the experience. It's still good. But after thinking about it for as long as I have, I grew entirely certain of one thing. If a new button emerges as a default attack button in the next few years, and if Ubisoft were to remake Blackflag again in the era of the new button's popularity, the attack button would cease to be R1. And I think that tells me what I need to know. Nostalgia is such an interesting thing to try and combat when talking about video game remakes. Of course, part of what makes this conversation about Assassin's Creed Blackflag Resynced interesting is the fact that we have the original game to compare its design choices to. It's so fascinating to think about the games and other pieces of media that subconsciously took hold in our minds back when we were younger, which is something I've been thinking a lot about after watching Sarah Davis Baker's latest series called Half Remembered, that dives into pieces of media from her childhood and how they're sometimes completely different from how she remembers them. It's a really great show that highlights the ways our brains misremember old media while simultaneously creating powerful connections with the things we think we remember. It's a fascinating look at how nostalgia works and what happens when we confront it. The first 2 episodes of Half Remembered are excellent, and you can watch them right now, both exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a really cool streaming service where you can find some of the best content on the internet. If you sign up, you'll get access to all of my videos that go up on YouTube a full 24 hours early, in addition to my monthly bonus videos, like the one about Assassin's Creed that inspired this video. You can also find stuff like me eating incredibly spicy wings and talking about games, a video about how bad Metroid Prime 4 is, and a video talking about how Resident Evil 9 is actually pretty funny. My content is just the tip of the iceberg, however. On Nebula, you'll also find everything from incredible gaming creators like Jacob Geller, King K, Eurothug 4000, and Razbuten, whose video about good mechanics in bad games served as some inspiration for this video. If having access to all of that great ad-free content sounds good to you, you can actually get a deal on a Nebula subscription if you sign up using the link down below. With my link, you can save 50% off a yearly subscription, bringing the price down to just $30 or $2.50 per month. Honestly, it's a great deal considering how much stuff gets added to Nebula literally every day, like new content from my favorites outside of the gaming space like Lindsay Ellis, Big Joel, FD Signifier, and Tom Scott, whose new Nebula exclusive show is fantastic. Again, if you use my link, you'll get all of that prestige content and more for 50% off. But if you want to lock in a lifetime subscription to Nebula, viewers of my channel can get just 40% off the $500 price tag, taking a lifetime subscription down to just $300. I love my Nebula subscription. It's great to catch up on all the bonus content from my favorite creators that I might have missed over the years, and I especially like Nebula's original shows like Abolish Everything and Jetlag the Game. Again, use my link in the description of this video or scan the QR code on screen for 50% off a yearly Nebula subscription. Thank you to Nebula and my supporters on Patreon for making this video possible. Like and subscribe. I've got your back.